Welcome back. Right off the bat, it's time to start cranking colony numbers. I'd first like to welcome Astro to the colony. As colonists go, Astro could really use a hand. And a leg. And another leg. Yet your buddies dropped multiple grenades on you during the raid that you attempted in my recreation room, and then they left you for dead. So, maybe rethink your choice of friends in the future. I'd love to say that nothing like this will ever happen in my colony, but I'm reasonably certain that we have still eaten more colonists than we have recruited at this point. So chin up, keep your head down, shoot straight, and we will be good. Whoosh, you naughty, naughty pawn. Your lover has, unironically, fallen out of heaven. We know this because it looks like they hit a couple of things on the way down. Ouchies. Into the recruitment hole they go, all are welcome here. Speaking of things falling out of heaven, defoliator ship. In an excellent spot, no less, since any attacking pawns have to path within its line of sight, unless their raid group spawns directly to the north of me. Yes, please, and thank you, Randy. Also welcome Magawan, now Luna Rose, to the colony. You rolled a really terrible pawn, and for that I am sorry, but we will get you a leg and an eye and some gear, and you can be a battle janitor or something. There is actually a hilarious meme that makes the rounds in the Rimworld community every once in a while that the best combatants are actually just janitors in their free time, and people keep them around even if they're utterly useless because they absolutely tear glutes on the battlefield. So don't worry, you will be in excellent company. With all that recruitment out of the way, hi, we're here. Welcome to my test world. I've done some research, and I have some very special things to show you to give context for some of the weird jank that I'm going to be doing in this episode. In order to understand them, I first need to give you a primer on how temperature works, hence why we are in a test environment. Temperature is a measure of how much heat is on a tile in Rimworld, and is closely coupled with the idea of a room. Any space that is solidly walled in on all sides with walls, closed doors, closed vents, natural terrain walls like rock walls, and uniquely the side of a nutrient paste dispenser, and is at least 75% roofed in, is considered to be a room by the game. Anything that doesn't meet those requirements is considered to be outside, and instantly equalizes to the ambient external temperature, which basically means its heat level is set and forced to remain at whatever the heat level of the map is. Since we really only care about heat levels inside rooms for this bit of tech, we're going to focus on those. Heat levels can range from negative 273 degrees centigrade to 1000 degrees centigrade, with negative 273 being basically zero heat, and 1000 being the maximum. Various things generate various amounts of heat, like fires, campfires, heaters, animals, insect hives, or steam geysers, as examples, and one thing, a cooler, can move it from one room and place it into another, while adding some in the process to simulate the idea of entropy. It doesn't generate cold per se, but it does generate areas of less heat, so the effect is mostly semantic. Heat is also permeable to an extent, and will leak from hot areas to cold areas through walls and closed doors, and will leak substantially faster through open vents and open doors, although critically, vents and doors, closed, open, or otherwise, still respect the idea of a room, and can maintain a temperature differential between them if they can't equalize fast enough. All these rules have some logical implications. For example, if two smaller rooms are joined together, their heat values will average out relative to the space of the initial rooms and the temperature that they were maintaining. If one room has a heater and a vent into a second room, heat will naturally dissipate through the vent into the second room, provided that the second room is colder. And if the heater is removed, both rooms will eventually equalize with the ambient environment. If a cooler is connected to its own heat output via a vent or open door, and we have to do this because coolers refuse to work if both sides are in the same room, this results in the combined space just getting hotter, because coolers don't destroy heat, they just move it, which is exactly what would happen if you left an open fridge in an insulated room. All of this is pretty normal and logical so far. We're not here for normal and logical though, so let's get weirder with it. Heat disperses through walls. More walls, in theory, then means more insulation. but because of how the game is optimized, the calculations only respect the insulative power of the first wall that you add, and treat everything beyond that as being outside for calculation purposes. So walls any thicker than 2 blocks are entirely superfluous, and in certain situations can actually hurt your insulation by creating artificial pockets of outside space. The heat transmission calculations also ignore heat bleed through from corners, which results in weird cases where buildings like this one on the left are insulated exactly as much as the building on the right. Heat bleed also happens with roofs, with thick rock roofing being more insulative than thin rock or constructed roofing, though constructed and thin rock roofing are the same. Contrary to what older information tells you, doors also bleed heat, just like walls do now. Sort of. More on that later. But double thick walls under a thick rock roof are still a very, very strong insulator. Nothing's broken yet. We gotta get even weirder. Doors are treated like a single block-sized room by the game for optimization and coding reasons, and this causes some odd behaviors when it comes to heat retention. Previously, doors were coded to only empty heat into air blocks touching the door and would completely ignore any other heat dissipation methods. This resulted in some very strange edge cases that could be exploited to make perfectly insulated spaces, one-way heat diodes, and cold or heat deleting mechanics by directionally feeding in a temperature or allowing a temperature to equalize in a specific arrangement of doors, coolers, walls, and empty space. Unfortunately for us, all this fun tech was deemed too janky by the powers that be and was patched out. Doors now dissipate heat like any other solid block and will attempt to average out temperature differentials in a more logical way if they touch more than one room. It's still technically possible to void heat by dissipating it through the ceiling or thick enough walls, but that relies on passive heat dissipation of the room and it's extremely inefficient. Fortunately for us, when Ludian patched the heat diode tech, they accidentally broke it even harder. Based on a couple posts and some toy designs provided by HarryDare6686 on the Rimworld subreddit, I'm proud to present you the incredible cheese that is what I will call differential deletion. Recall that coolers pick up heat from their cold side and output the heat they picked up, plus extra, on their warm side. If you place a cooler between 2 rooms and connect these rooms with a vent, that extra heat then ends up warming the room. This makes sense. What makes less sense is what happens when you put a door on one side of the cooler. In this case, let's start with the hot side. This results in a hot door for a hot second, but then the combined temperature of the room abruptly plummets to ridiculously cold temperatures for no apparent reason, provided that the cooler is set down low enough. This happens again in reverse when I move the door over to the cold side, quickly sending temperatures skyrocketing. So, what gives? The easiest way I can explain this is that Rimworld equalizes the temperature of the door with the room, but due to an oversight in the code, it doesn't equalize the temperature of the room with the door. If I have an extremely cold room with an extremely hot door in it, the equalization cycle then results in the door immediately chilling down to match. Since in this example there's only one room to equalize with, the door then matches the temperature of the room as it slowly heats up from ambient environmental temperatures, unless I reheat it again, and this process will repeat itself no matter how hot the door gets. I can repeatedly heat it up into molten slag using dev commands only for it to equalize immediately after, and, most importantly, all of this has no effect on the room the door is touching, which remains a cryogenic freezer. To demonstrate this more clearly, I can recreate the exact same design of building, but heat one door and leave the other untouched. The adjoining room heats up at exactly the same rate, meaning that the presence of a door hot enough to cast bronze has exactly 0 effect on the temperature of the room, and if I reverse the temperature differential, the exact same thing would happen. The key takeaway here is then that this interaction does not actually create or delete heat per se, it deletes any difference between the heat of the door and the heat of its adjoining room, hence differential deletion. In my earlier example, by placing a door on the hot side of the heater, the heat differential adjusts to the ambiently colder room as defined by the temperature of the one block room above the design. Since this is colder than the door because of the cold air coming in from the cooler, when the heat differential is deleted, the room chills the door, resulting in another cold door. The heater then immediately reheats the door, but in the process, the rest of the rooms get even colder, and the door's heat differential is again deleted and normalized to an even colder temperature. This then repeats, limiting out to only how cold the cooler can push the room before environmental heat dissipation begins to dominate the interaction. This exact same thing happens in reverse when the door is on the cold side, again limited by natural heat dissipation and how hot the cooler can get the room. So, what can we do with all this? Well, by adding some carefully placed vents, it's possible to get around this one-way differential deletion by directly connecting the temperature of a room to the temperature of a door. This equalization works normally, so if you have a really extra temperature door, you can get a really extra temperature room and a slightly less extra temperature door, but meanwhile the door is constantly having its differential between it and the extremely extra room on the other side deleted, resulting in the door constantly trying to equalize any room on the other side of the vent with its janked temperature profile. This effect can also be chained together to a certain extent, though weaker differentials die out pretty quickly due to normalization with ambient temperatures, so the better way of multiplying the effect is to have as many vents touching as many extra cold or extra hot doors as possible before chaining it together, resulting in these sort of weird fractally patterns. Unfortunately for my optimization brain, Harry Dare seems to have already found the most efficient design for creating extra cold, and it is this ugly thing. Trust me, my inability to find a better design was not for a lack of trying. I spent multiple hours attempting to optimize this or otherwise improve on it, and did not make any substantial headway, so credit to Harry Dare for doing their homework. Most critically for my base designs, though, is that this system is substantially easier to build and power than a crucible is, works on cold instead of heat, meaning that I can build it in my mountain base without risking bug infestations, and it is an intense enough effect that I can scale down the size of the runway before feeding the enemies into it. As a brief aside, welcome, Zuan, to the colony. You are apparently Whoosh's lover, so I'm sure you and Whoosh will have a wonderful time together unless one or both of you gets turned into bird feed, in which case you will not be having much of a time together at all except in the form of a nutrient popsicle. As a side effect of me discovering this tech, this means that all the work I had my colonists doing on the hotbox design is now entirely obsolete. With the one exception of dropping pawns faster at extremely hot heat levels, hotboxes are strictly inferior to this cold box design, and I only ever used hotboxes because it's so much easier to heat something up compared to chilling it down. As an added advantage, cold boxes benefit from being built under thick rock roofing for the aforementioned insulation bonus, which means not only can I build the design in my base, I actually want to in order to improve its functionality. The design I land on is functionally identical to my hotbox design since the basic functions are entirely the same. I give it a nice long runway, doubly insulated walls to, in this case, keep extreme cold from permeating, lots of movement slowing objects, easy access for cleanup, and instead of a heating chamber, a cooling chamber with a heat amplifier system to bring the whole thing back to an operable temperature when I want to extract loot from the thing. This heating chamber, by the way, is the logical continuation of differential deletion technology applied to a basic heater. By telling the heater to keep an area warmed to, say, negative 20 degrees centigrade, and disabling the cooling chamber, the differential deletion is then applied in the opposite direction, which in effect massively amplifies the power of a single heater. Harry Dare originally demoed it by using a geothermal vent to heat a partially open-roofed warehouse as a substitute for heaters and sun lamps, but it works just as well on a small scale with regular heaters, and I will end up repeating this design later on several times. The system also gets an unintentional test against some megaslaws, sort of. It does at least spin up really, really quickly, but I don't think those slaws are going to be hurting anyone. The completion of this project marks a complete shift in my long-term priorities. To be quite blunt, most of my colonists are basically useless. Their mental stability is questionable, their combat capability is laughable, half of them are missing critical body parts, and if Randy ever stops playing softball with my raids, he sent 3 manhunting animal packs in a row during the cold box construction, by the way, it was ridiculous, then I'm going to end up being a well-fortified piece of toast. Fortifications are great in the early and mid-game, but they start having diminishing returns pretty fast when faced off against 100 pirates with rocket launchers, and things like sappers are basically impossible to fortify against in the first place. The only real defense in the endgame is having lots and lots of strong, well-armed, well-armored, mentally stable pawns with really, really big pea shooters, and I kind of need to get on that. I've got the pawn count part of that requirement sorted, mostly, so I need to escalate my production of military goods. Military goods require large amounts of steel, components, plasteel, and working hours to make, and skilled pawns to do the making, which means I need to rearrange priorities around so that any pawn good enough to be crafting components or mining raw resources is doing that with as few interruptions as possible. Fiona has been doing an admirable job keeping everyone in marine helmets, but she's starting to get tapped out and needs someone to help pick up the slack. This someone ends up being Calislide, who rolled a completely ridiculous collection of traits and passions. In addition to having a double fire passion for crafting, they are a fast learner, which results in a global learning stat for the skill of 262%. For reference, the default is 35%, for those who are wondering. Since that isn't silly enough, they also are a tortured artist, which is utterly broken when combined with high-skilled builders or crafters. Tortured artists have a chance of being creatively inspired every time they recover from a mental break at the cost of a natural -8 passive moodlet. Combined with their ridiculous crafting abilities and the dubious quality of life in the colony right now, this means Calislide should be reliably cranking out masterwork and legendary tier equipment as long as I make sure their life is just a little bit more unpleasant than it strictly has to be. Sign me up. While the re-armification of my colony continues apace, I start putting in work trying to stack positive moodlets for my pawns. The first and most obvious step is to get them better bedrooms. I've had people sleeping on the floor for, quite a while now, which causes zero happy thoughts and quite a lot of back pain. The relative mood improvement gained by letting people sleep in beds can be cranked even higher by cramming things in the room to make the rooms more valuable and beautiful, which is something I'm interested in, so I swap in Boz for Keiki on researching and tell Keiki to start vomiting creativity in industrial scale on whatever random chunks of stone that he can find. We interrupt the previously scheduled colony simulator plans to bring you a breaking news development now. Yaks make tracks. Yaks make tracks of black yak pats. Yaks make fat stacks of black yak pats and tracks when stacks of yak snack pack track yak trap racks, and yaks refuse to backtrack back to yak shacks when shacks of yak snack packs crack yak shack trap racks. Or, in other words, some numpty left nutrient paste meals in the fence-scape, holding it open and letting all of my yaks escape and wander around the base. Janitorial Services now wants to mount my head on a mop. Improving my passive mood modifiers also means that it's time for outdoor recreation rooms to go away. Claustrophobia is still a thing that weighs on my pawns' minds, but I don't feel like making a nice expensive dining and recreation area only for it to be trashed by the next drop pod raid. And the combined moodlet offset of having one of those fully kitted out is worth dealing with claustrophobia, especially in situations where it matters, like, mech raids, and my pawns will be outside recovering from the effect anyway. Fun life tip: if you ever feel like you're being suffocated by millions of tons of cold, merciless stone, just remember you have a fancy gold statue in your dining closet, and that will make all the problems go away. This also presents a great chance to show off my cold box, as while I was grabbing this clip, Randy sends me yet another man-hunting animal pack, this time of Arctic wolves. This makes 4, by the way. All I need to do to attract the wolves is stack up some valuable colonists at the entrance to the cold box, and the wolves will happily form a nice orderly conga line before reenacting a scene from Frozen meets War Crime documentary crossover, netting me a happy assortment of slightly frosty, decaying wolf bodies covered in a fine patina of liquid oxygen. After that, all I have to do to reset this is warm the system up enough for safe colonist operation, and have my pawns pull out everything using the access doors on the bottom of the racks. As harped on at great length earlier, one of the nice things about mountain bases is that siegers are basically unable to do anything about them. Randy's next siege bombards me for the better part of 4 days, and with a bit of careful micromanagement to ensure that my autocannons don't accidentally burn into slag, I'm able to weather the entire storm for the low price of 1 slightly seared calf muscle. The raiders see this, give up, and assault me directly with entirely predictable results. Namely, the spontaneous creation of a very large number of very well-geared popsicles and a few live fish that I can recruit or use as replacement organs. Oh, Randy. Randy, when are you gonna learn that your actions just make more meatsicles? Welcome to the colony. I like orange juice. You will be, a something. Maybe you can smooth floors or break rocks, or I don't know. Mostly you're just here to hold a charge rifle, so have fun with that. Welcome also to the colony. Ya Mum Has the Big Gay. Kind of a sus account name, but sure, we'll roll with it. Like all of the other super long names that doesn't fit, you will instead be called Ya Mum Has the Big G. You get to be a researcher because I need more rare ore veins to dig up. Randy finally gets with the program and sends me an attack that isn't hard countered by Negentropic Freezer Jank. Unfortunately for Randy, Operation Everyone Gets a Charge Rifle has been a rousing success, and the poor Scyther ball he gave me is met with a withering barrage of fire. To say that the Scythers get shredded is kind of an understatement. It's more like I perform a select-all-delete operation with a mouse cursor made out of high-energy plasma. The real issue is the stupid things keep getting stuck and wandering off to go punch walls or something, which makes grouping them up to delete them a pain and unnecessarily drags out the raid. This is a sign that the pathing requirements for hostiles are getting too complicated, since if the route gets too long, enemies will just give up and will go and punch your walls in frustration. While we're on the topic of expansionism, it's high time I modernized my kitchen and food production systems. Throwing stacks of yaks in a corner works great and all, but I currently have like 90 of the things, and I have no intention of ever stopping their exponential growth until I am physically unable to feed them, which tends to make the logistics a bit tricky. I also want somewhere to put fresh bodies for further processing. My current setup is positioned in the middle of the hallway, and for some strange reason, most of my pawns get a little bit disturbed when they have to climb over the flash-frozen corpses of their enemies in order to reach the larder. They really don't make pawns the same anymore, do they? Wimps. The new system requires a substantial amount of space for a variety of reasons, but my hope is that it will be able to scale enough to last a while. In addition to giving the yak ball its own room, complete with upgraded food stockpiling potential, I built in a generous corpse closet, a processing area complete with cremation and smelting capabilities for those corpses and clothing bits which are inedible, and a proper cooking area. That's right, we're gonna try and produce actual food, because I want to swap over to at least simple meals to mitigate some of the massive mood debuffs and efficiency losses that come from eating paste. Nutrient paste meals are unique in that pawns will never pick them up and store them in their inventory, which makes sense. I wouldn't particularly want to place a piece of flash frozen goo in my pants if I didn't have a set of pockets, so I'm not going to judge them there, but it does cause them to have to run back to the dispenser every time they need to eat instead of having their pocket lunch, and in a base as large as this one, that results in a huge time loss. Plus, pawns hate them, which makes them crazy. I have plans on the back burner to get some sort of hydroponics setup going for a bit, but the insect problem's going to take a while to solve, so I will hold off for now and we will only have simple meals. The pathing problem is easy to solve, by the way. It's just make the path smaller. I accomplished this by trimming down some of the western fortifications to allow enemies through without forcing them around the giant rock formation to the north. This shortens their paths by 100 blocks or more, so everything should be fine for now. I've done some thinking, and I don't think there is any way I can get around needing hydroponics. It may be possible for me to survive without them, but it's going to be seriously inconvenient. Without hydroponics, I can't effectively grow plants, which means the only sources of plant materials are very expensive trade deals with orbital traders, and that isn't super reliable. Hydroponics give me access to cloth, used in medicine and flak armor production, herbal medicine, which is medicine, so it's obviously necessary, and a very, very strong renewable source of food in the form of hydroponically grown rice, which I can use to make packaged survival meals which sell for a lot of money, kibble to reduce the micro needed to supply 100 plus yaks with nutrient-paced meals, fine meals to keep my colonists happy, and chem fuel to mass manufacture mortar shells. That is to say, hydroponics is really, really useful. The trick is dealing with the insects, but I think I found a solution in the form of negentropic nonsense. Plants need heat to grow, which means hydroponic farms risk either mortar bombardment or insect infestation, depending on if I make them outside or under a mountain. The best way of dealing with insects, which is fire, is extraordinarily disruptive to hydroponic farms for reasons that should be blisteringly obvious, which means hotboxes are a no-go, forcing me to directly engage the bugs when I have to get rid of them. Or it did until cold box tech became a thing. By creating a couple of cold boxes in the same airspace as the hydroponics basins, I can remotely turn them on by reconnecting the coolers to powered cables. The cooling loop for these things is incredibly fast, so I should be able to very quickly frost over the hydroponics basins, which presumably are where the insects are going to spawn in from. Insects don't suffer hypothermia damage, meaning that I can freeze them without aggroing them, so the risk of damage to those hydroponic basins is fairly low, and if I introduce a couple choke points and make sure that the hydroponics are far enough away from the main base, I should be nearly guaranteed to keep all the hives in the freezing areas. Plus, in the absolute worst case, there's nothing stopping me from just applying overwhelming firepower to the problem either, but I would prefer to avoid doing that, because my colonists have more important things to do with their time. This is going to be a very, very long-term project, so I need something else to keep my pawns occupied with while the mining and clearing is happening. For Fiona, I casually made marine helmets for everyone in the colony. Now what, boss? TGT, this is the thankless, incredibly long-term task of producing a suite of bionic parts to upgrade everyone. I tend to take one of two approaches to bionic upgrades, depending on how stable the pawn being upgraded is. If they have all their stuff together, they get a full set. If it can be upgraded, it gets upgraded. For pawns who are less mentally stable and may need to be physically restrained, read beaten into submission, I avoid giving them bionic arms or legs. The reason for this is that bionic parts can't feel pain, which makes a violent takedown of a pawn prone to breaking expensive bits of tech or just straight up killing the pawn. They still will get all the internals, though. The first priority for Fiona is bionic replacements for damaged, missing, or scarred body parts, and after that it will be hearts and stomachs. Bionic hearts make it impossible to have a heart attack, and bionic stomachs make it impossible to get gutworms, which are both things I would like to be immune to. Oh, and if you were wondering how sapping raids were going, it's basically just multiple reduxes of this. The general strategy is to do whatever I have to do to drop the thumper mechs, and after they're gone, the rest can be melted pretty effectively by throwing my pawns into some kind of cover and letting them hammer down everything that survives. The mechs will almost always come around the horn of my defenses down here, which leaves them vulnerable to getting picked off a few at a time, and they aren't smart enough to aggro all at once because they're sappers. Honestly, this was one of my more sloppy defenses, but it got the job done. Damage is admittedly starting to pile up though, so Fiona could really stand to get cracking on those bionics. Welcome to the colony, Elliot Roney. Once we get you an arm and train you up, you will make a lovely doctor engineer. Before having my builders start construction on the hydroponics assembly, I have another, much more important job for them. Make this place pleasant to live in. There is a constant spam of low-level mental breaks happening that I want to mitigate as much as possible, which means I have to do inconvenient things like provide my pawns with bedrooms, smooth all the floors and walls to make them look nice, and get comfortable furniture up. Truly, the great sacrifices I make for these whiny little meat sacks. The next thing that happens is very, very exciting. Oh, ignore the wounded colonists, by the way. I just beat off Randy's recent sapper attempt. I have an orbital trader. This is exciting because my colonists have been very busy little beavers, and after scrolling past the entire page of pregnant yaks, I can start cranking out massive deals. In exchange for a deeply concerning amount of human leather dusters and a mountain of skinned animals, I net myself every single twig of wood, every single scrap of steel, nugget of plasteel, every drop of neutroamine, book, and component the trader has to offer, in addition to a bunch of silver. I don't care about how much of a loss it was at either, I can just crank out more of this stuff without any problems. In other excellent news, Goose eventually gets their game on and flirts their way into a successful relationship with a pawn who was previously called Astro. Sorry, Astro, I'm not having my avatar shacking up with one of my channel members because that is weird. I will instead make a note and you can be my next colonist instead. After an extensive amount of time having my pawns beat their head against brick walls, my hydroponic space is ready to start accepting machines. First in line are the differential deletion systems that should hopefully be strong enough to deal with the insects. This is firmly theoretical, by the way. I have no idea if they will be able to chill the place down fast enough to freeze the bugs before the bugs destroy the negentropic effect, and in the worst case, I'm just going to have to cram large amounts of charge rifle fire down a hallway and call it good. I've also started making simple meals now. I stopped expanding my yak population a little while ago because it was getting entirely unmanageable, and the resulting surplus of meat is so large that I simply cannot eat my way through it fast enough. This is good news, but it also means that once I get rice production going, I'm going to be drowning in too much stuff, which is, if nothing else, a good problem to have. I was originally going to close out the episode by finishing up my first hydroponics block, but it seems that Randy has once again had other ideas. This ever-so-intelligent psychic ship has decided it wants to defend itself using nothing but scythers. Well, that is indeed a decision. A well-aimed shot by Fiona with a mortar battery breaks the ship part and sends the scythers in. As before, I stack my pawns into a death ball and deploy rolling barrages of EMPs. This plan should have worked perfectly, and it has done so in the past, but by sheer random chance and pathing jank, a couple of the scythers do manage to break through, and through incredible misfortune and a little bit of laziness on my part, one of them manages to kill my first colonist, dropping Orlean from intense chest trauma, making them the first unintended pawn death to occur in this entire playthrough. I wish I could say it was unavoidable, but no, it was mostly just me not paying attention, so sorry about that, Orlean. Unfortunately, this is just life on the rim, and I will have to have Goose inter them in a sarcophagus in the absolute furthest back portion of my base. Their body is intact, and it can remain frozen for years if it needs to, so there may be hope for them if I can find a resurrection serum. Those are very rare and can only be sourced as a quest reward or rare drop from an ancient danger, but I would not be opposed to mounting a raid if I hear of the location of one. Regardless, with that tragedy, I will bid you all farewell. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.